I'd like to introduce you to today's presenter, Scott Weersing. Scott Weersing serves as Director of Learning Analytics for GP Strategies and partners with clients to show the value and impact of learning programs on business outcomes. He has worked with a variety of clients in industries, including manufacturing, healthcare, insurance, and call centers to link training to business metrics. So Scott, it's a pleasure to introduce you, and I will go ahead and turn the session over to you.
Hey, thanks a lot. Thanks for taking the time to join us today. So we just want to kind of get started really on, answering that big question of what is data-driven. That's kind of a big buzzword that's out there, but I wanted to give you my kind of viewpoint on some of the behaviors and things that you can do to be data-driven. And then we'll talk a little bit more about some strategies in learning that helps us to use data better. So I think really it starts off with using data rather than intuition or assumption. Oftentimes we're making decisions and we base it on feeling or what we think. And again, sometimes that may be based on incomplete data or feelings or what you heard and stuff like that. So I think really it's making sure that you have some quantitative and qualitative data to make your decisions. And so really the key with any being data driven is really is your decision focused. And so you're trying to use data to decide if you're going to start doing something, stop doing something, or pivot and start, think about where we're going to go different and where we're going to pivot to do something differently. So it's really a lot of being data driven is, again, focusing on a decision. And so I think that's a key thing. Part of data driven is actually kind of using a hypothesis, kind of, predicting what you think is going to happen, and then finding the data to prove or disprove your hypothesis. So will this learning make an impact on something? That's a question or a hypothesis. Do our learners like this? Will this make a difference? Those are all kind of, hypothesis, and you're kind of making a guess of yes or no and finding out, does the data support your hypothesis? Again, it's often used in the sciences, and they come up with a hypothesis and they're trying to prove it, but that's something, that we should also be doing when we're data-driven. And data-driven is really solving problems. I became interested in data when, people came to me and said, hey, we need training to solve this problem. I was always asking, well, what data do you have that shows there's a problem? Because then we can show there's a difference. We can move the needle. And so that's really the key thing about being data-driven is solving problems and trying to improve a number or improve a data. And sometimes that data can be a real number. Sometimes it can just be changing an impression or a feeling. People feel that the training's more effective, or they feel they're more engaged. And so it could be a combination of quantitative or qualitative data. And then, of course, being data-driven is results-focused, so that what those problems that we're solving are ones that really matter. And so that's something always to be kind of thinking about is, is this problem even worth solving? And the result's going to make a difference to our partners and to our organization. So we're seeing a kind of a big change of, why are we all of a sudden trying, why is data-driven kind of a new thing or getting more of a priority? And I would say that we're in a really accelerated speed of business. Businesses are repurposing and changing what they're doing to keep up, and realize you can't keep doing the same things. And so that's going to be a case where, again, it's just, because of the change, there's going to be just a lot more information and data out there. And then because of technology, we're seeing a digital transformation. So again, there's a chance to collect so much more data from so many different interactions. And so there's going to be that change that we have to prepare for. And so part of being that digital transformation is being data-driven. Part of that digital experience is a personalized experience. We're seeing that with any kind of shopping experience where, hey, we noticed that you bought this previously. Are you interested in that? And so those are a lot of APIs and things that you're seeing that kind of follow you along. But also, again, making sure that you're seeing what you want to see and not seeing what's not interesting to you. And then because of all this technology, we just have a lot more data out there. And we're going to talk about some ways you can be data-driven and sort through all the data that's out there. So one of the big changes in this digital transformation is we're really kind of moving from a traditional classroom to, which is a traditional learning experience, which again is classroom-based. We're pushing content to learners. It's trainer-led. it's usually for future use on the job, maybe nice to have, and often time consuming, and again, often pictured by this classroom. And so the digital transformation is we're kind of moving from this experience in the learning space, and we're kind of moving to this digital learning experience, which is, again, something that, again, probably our learners are craving, because we want the experience in our classrooms and our workplace to kind of match what's happening outside of our workplace. And so it's really important that as learning leaders that we kind of work towards that. And so digital learning experience is one that's more is short. Again, micro-learning is a key thing. It's relevant. It's when you need it. It's role specific. It fits the moments of needs. Again, it's also role specific, so it's customized to their role. We're also seeing a collaboration among learners, so you're learning from each other, not just from the content. It's something we see in the traditional room also, but there's the tools out there to help that collaboration in the digital learning space. We're also moving to kind of a space where the learners are pulling what they need rather than us pushing it to them. Also, in digital learning, again, that we're also seeing a lot of user-generated content, which then increases our data set and availability of data that we can use. And then multiple delivery channels. We're seeing, that learning can be accessed anytime, anywhere, any devices. And so those are kind of the key things that are kind of propelling us in creating a lot more data that we can use to be data-driven. So really, the key question is how do we kind of, what are some of the strategies to move from this traditional learning space to the digital, kind of keep up with the rest of our world. And so I want to kind of share some different ways. And one of the ways is kind of is thinking about the big data that's out there. And so there's a lot of questions about, hey, is big data really useful to us? And it is and it isn't. And so big data is characterized by the vast amounts of data, the volume, the velocity. It's coming out really fast. For example, credit card transactions are happening, every second. We get a variety of data now, so from financial, social media, photos, all sorts of different data that's coming along in that variety. Veracity is the messiness of it, and we're getting a little bit better in cleaning that up, that eventually maybe that won't be a characteristic, that we can actually determine if the data is the right kind of things we need. And then value. Again, we can collect a lot of different data, but it's got to have value. It's got to be valuable and have insights for our stakeholders. And so one of the key things is trying to make sure you have you have a kind of a data strategy for how you're collecting data in your workplace and how you're going to use it. So we have lots of data already in our learning space. You may not really think about that, but these things are things that we can already use and be data-driven. We have lots of data from our LMS. We have a lot of different data that we can collect from surveys. We're getting to using XAPI data, which is data about the learning experience. We have HR data, and then we can also, again, partner with quality or some of our business partners for on-the-job metrics and business outcomes. So again, there's data out there that we can use to be data-driven and make decisions. Another way to look at data is kind of these categories. And so I like these because, again, they kind of, you can, instead of just how you collect it, they can also kind of help you answer questions. So a lot of the data we collect is descriptive. It tells you what happened. That's kind of stuff we get from our LMS. And then diagnostic, that's kind of a little more insight, is why it happened. And then I talked about XAPI and kind of a new category called real-time data. So what is happening now? And so that gives us a better clarity than rather than using descriptive data. And then we really want to get to the, if we're going to be data-driven, we really want to start being, using predictive data. What will happen? And then I think another key insight is prescriptive data. How do I make it happen for you? So it worked for these people. How do I make this learning experience or this intervention work again for somebody else? And what are the elements or characteristics or data set to repeat that? So this is kind of things that you can, again, align. If you're being data driven, you can align your solutions based on your data set. So again, we're trying to move in a maturity level from probably this descriptive down to actually prescriptive. And so again, probably you start with looking at descriptive and then work your way down the categories. So a couple different ways to be data-driven, or some ideas that you may not have thought about to use data to to show the impact of learning and to show that what we're doing is making a difference. So the first one is voice of the learner. And so, in the digital world, everybody's a customer, but I think we need to shift our mindsets also that our learners are customers, and they're a good source of data. And so we can collect that voice, and then because we have their voice and we have the data on them, then we can actually start using a learner-centric design that meets their needs and their wants. And that's something that's already happening in the digital world. But again, another kind of element of data is, again, using data to make decisions. So how am I going to adapt my learning and training to the needs and wants of my learners? So some of the things you can really, ask your voice of the learner or determine from your current data set are some of the questions is, what content do learners engage with? Are they actually pulling things? What devices are the learners using? When are they engaging with our content? Who are they engaging and collaborating with? How did learners use the content? And then again, obviously, what was the impact of the learning experience based on the learners? So those are some of the kind of key questions when you can, if you could take the time to collect data from your learners, are some questions you can ask. Another kind of key way is actually, is using, skip a slide. No. Another key thing is, another good practice of reading data is learning analytics, and that's kind of my full-time role, and kind of give you two different definitions. And really, learning analytics is to show the value and impact of learning programs on outcomes. And those outcomes are, what are we trying to change? And hopefully those outcomes, again, are data-driven. But again, learning analytics are our current practices to prove, improve, and sustain learning programs. Prove to make sure that they work, improve to make them better, and then keep them going. Another key part that drives any learning analytics or any strategy is making sure you're collecting the data that's most important to your stakeholders. And so oftentimes we forget that our learners are stakeholders, and we got to make sure that we're addressing their needs. But you also got to think about who your other stakeholders are in your business. It could be your HR partners, your business partners, or your internal stakeholders, your other training managers you work with. And so being data-driven is making sure that the data that you're collecting and sharing is relevant to your stakeholders. So I just want to talk about some of the kind of ways that I approach learning analytics, and some of the kind of questions that you should be asking. And I think that's the key thing of being data-driven is coming up with the questions you want answered and then finding the data to answer those. So again, here's kind of a set of different questions that you can answer, but again, starting with the end in mind. And so again, it talks about, again, it kind of fits into some of the categories of what happened, did we save any money, and what will happen next, and what will happen when we make changes. So I really wanted to talk about three kind of strategies, or three kind of areas that we can show impact, again, using data. So the first one's efficiency, and that's probably the simplest one to start. Is how fast did this training take place? How much time can we save in this training? Can we reduce the training and make it faster? And if we can save time, can we save dollars? And another efficiency metric that we're often forgetting about is how much content did we reuse? That'd be a kind of a story to tell with the end in mind that we repurposed a lot of this content from a previous thing, and that's safe design time. So that's, again, another way to show, if you're tracking things, collecting the right data, you can tell the story of efficiency. Effectiveness is, again, how much better, and looking at, did the learning impact performance on the job, and can they actually apply that learning? And so that's kind of really the key judge of the effectiveness of training, is did it make an impact on the learners? And then hopefully, if you're doing effectiveness, then you can also often link those behaviors or performance to business outcomes. And so there's usually, again, key performance indicators. We can measure things like customer satisfaction, sales, profit, whatever those KPIs are that are important to your business and your business partners. And then again, you just kind of work backwards to figure out, is our training making an impact to those? So efficiency, some of the metrics and things, again, you can collect is time away from work, money saved, and percent of tasks on time efficiency. And again, the way to do this is you compare results before an intervention with after an intervention. Or you compare results of people who received the training with those who didn't, kind of in a pilot phase. And it usually often looks, moving on to effectiveness. Again, surveys are still really valid to show that the training was effective. Test scores can make a difference. Application on the job or scrap learning. So, and again, I've done this by comparing, performance month over month or course to course to show the improvement or change. Here's kind of just an example of a project I did when I was trying to improve the production quality, so kind of an effective thing. And so you kind of do your analysis in the beginning, find out what's wrong, and then put your interventions in place over time. And so showing impact, again, is trying to show the change in either production or quality. So the production kind of went up pretty fast, and then it took a while to get the quality up to the goal. Again, we found out that people were working fast but not working well. So something to it's always good to track these two things together to make sure that they're aligned. And I would probably, if I did this again, I would make sure people do it right first and then do it fast. But again, just kind of an example of using production quality data to show the impact of your interventions. Here was another example. You can, again, show the effectiveness of a training by looking at turnover. So again, just coming with a baseline number of 12%, then we trained people, and again, if they were trained the previous year, the retention rate was 8.4, and then we made some kind of changes to the program and we got the retention rate even lower for the current people. And again, I think the huge difference here between 4.4 and 11. So you can use other metrics that aren't necessarily learning metrics to show the impact of your training. And this was a supervisor development program. Ideally, what everybody wants to do to show impact and be data driven is using big ones: KPIs, sales, customer satisfaction. And again, you're trying to find metrics that are linked with the profit and loss of the company, and you're really again trying to show month over month. Again, here was kind of a project we did for GM, and they wanted to know if this Finding Roads event made an impact on sales. And so we actually had, again, a couple different hypotheses. Did web-only training make a difference? Did in-dealership face-to-face training make a difference? Did the Find New Roads event make a difference? Or what if they did all three things and they're fully trained? And so again, with those hypotheses, then we could compare different things. We compared sales from the same time period year over year, and we saw, again, a 7% increase for everybody who did all the training. The Find New Roads event by themselves had 3%. So it's, again, remember, learning analytics is to improve the impact, at least improve it. So next on this event, maybe we should make sure that everybody does all the training, because we're going to probably see a big. And again, this one showed that training by itself didn't really, you didn't really make any impact to the training, no impact on sales. Again, it's another way to show outcomes is, this was a project where for service calls, and we had a baseline number, about 60,000 service calls. We put our intervention into place, and 6 months later, we reduced the number of service calls. And then again, we calculated the cost of those service calls and figured out, what a 23% decrease in service calls would be. So again, data-driven, one of the strategies is focus on learner experience, using that data from your learners, and then focus on that performance that you want after training. And so I really think kind of to be data driven, you have to really think about these kind of questions. What are the goals of this program? What are the business problems we're trying to solve? What are the behaviors that we can count that are causing these problems or change? And then this becomes, what do we need people to do differently? And that becomes actually your training. So, overall, kind of the key steps to be data-driven is find out what your learners need, ask them. Also find partners who are data-driven. There's other people in your organization that are interested in data and can teach you what they know. And then again, I always think start with efficiency and effectiveness. Don't try to connect your training to outcomes right off the bat. Try to see if you can measure these things first, and then hopefully they'll connect to business outcomes. And then, key thing is having conversations with your partners to ask about the business outcomes of a program rather than just taking an order. So those are some of the kind of key things, the strategies I see in becoming data-driven.
Well, Scott, we certainly covered a lot in 20, well, actually 21 minutes, and so I'm sure you could have, we could dive deeper into all of these different areas, but with that 20-minute overview, I think that was fabulous. And so what we'll do is we'll allow a few more minutes for those who can hang on the line to go through any of the questions that came in. There were a few. Just as a reminder, if you have a question for Scott, be sure to enter into the Q&A module at this time. That's in the lower right-hand panel of WebEx. And obviously a lot was covered in the last 20 minutes, and more information could still be discussed. So Scott, if you can go ahead and flip it to that last slide, that way we make sure everyone has access to your contact info. I definitely encourage you to continue the conversation with him beyond today's session. We'll also be sending everyone a link to a follow-up blog post where he'll be addressing some of today's key takeaways and any questions that we'll go through here in the Q&A portion of the webinar. And I'd also like to remind you that the recording and slides will be sent to the email address you provided within the next 24 hours. So we do have several questions coming in. I'll go ahead and jump into those. So Scott, what are some tools that you recommend for collecting data from learners?
I think the tools will depend on the data you're collecting, the number of learners. So there's some simple ones, SurveyMonkey could be used all the way to all sorts of ones off the shelf, but I think it's also look for tools that are already in place within your large organization. Maybe your HR is collecting some data from your learners that you could use. And so try to use existing data. And then again, I think, if you're not sure, ask, look for some experts in your organization about how we can, be more data driven in collecting data from learners.
And the next question is, do you think that surveys are an effective tool to collect data from learners?
I think surveys often get a bad rap because we often survey people and they get tired of them and they ask too many questions. I think survey can be an effective tool, but you really need to be strategic and really ask only questions that you couldn't get the data from somewhere else. So something I always think about my surveys, I ask the question, can I get this data from somewhere else already so I don't have to ask the learners? And then another key thing about surveys is you have to remember to ask the why question. So why did you choose the number in the item above is important because those surveys can help you put the comments to explain the why and complete your story.
And then actually this is a really good question because this is often one that comes up is how do you convince your org that training is worthwhile before you can actually prove the ROI?
So I think that's the key thing is often asking those orgs what success look like for you in your training. Is it is it completion rates? Is that a key thing? And that's the key thing is often asking what data would show that this is worthwhile to you. And if they can't, then you have to look for efficiency and effectiveness metrics that will show that it's worthwhile. Then you can eventually get to that outcomes and converting stuff to a return on investment. So I think that's why, again, I think oftentimes we often try to jump to ROI or outcomes when we really want to, we should start with that efficiency and effectiveness first, and then that will eventually show that there's an impact on outcomes. Hopefully, if it's efficient and effectiveness, then there'll be a causal chain to those outcomes, which kind of goes with Gina's question about, what do you mean don't try to connect training to outcomes? I think it's a crawl, walk, run. If you're already doing a good job of measuring efficiency and effectiveness, then yeah, now it's time to get to that higher level and really ask those hard questions of what impact will this training have on business outcomes. And if your partners are data driven, then they're going to be willing to partner with you to drive towards outcomes.
Absolutely, and actually that was going to be the question I just jumped into. So he kind of jumped into that next question, which was expanding on that, expanding on his statement he kind of made at the end of the session, which was don't try to connect training to outcomes at the very beginning. And so I think that's important. Any ideas on how to measure impact of leadership development courses?
Yeah, so one of those key, I've been asked this one lots of times. I think one of the ways is looking, leadership development is often looking at retention. So do our leaders that go through this program stay with us longer? And another key thing you could measure is people that work for these leaders stay with the company longer. So if they're an effective leader, then you're going to retain the people. And then another key thing about leadership development programs is promotion. Do people that go through this leadership program, are they promoted? Are they actually making lateral shifts too? Because again, we're trying to develop these skills for them to be leaders. Are they actually going to applying those and using those? And so then you can still go back to back to a survey and asking people, the leaders, and trying to create those stories of what was the impact of this leadership program on you. And it takes a little bit of time, but you can do inner surveys or interviews with them to ask them about those things. Those become those stories, and then those stories can help you market the program to the next set of leaders.
Because we are 6 minutes over, I'll go ahead and take one more question, but I'll leave the WebEx up here for a few minutes after we wrap up, just so if anyone else has a question for Scott, I want to make sure that we address it in that follow-up blog post. So after we go ahead and wrap up, go ahead and input any other questions that you have. I'll make sure to pass them along to him. But the last question that I'll go over today is, do you have any experience using big data tools for the purpose of improving learning?
Yes and no. I mean, I would say big data is all the stuff you're getting from our customers and those kind of things. And the goal is to try to partner with the people that have that data. So have I used a whole bunch of big data tools? No. But they're out there, and I think those are, again, data scientists and data analysts that can help you determine the right tools. But I think it all depends on what questions you're trying to answer, and depending if you need, or what we often say, what with the learning data, the data we already have. So I think that's the key thing. It all starts with the questions and then picking the tools to improve your learning. So I think that's the key thing. Again, the question is, how can we make our learning better? Well, again, data is part of it, but it's also trying to figure out, identifying the factors that impact that training. And there's a variety of different factors that impact training, but again, obviously the practice, the manager support, a variety of different things that you can look into that impact the application of training. And those aren't necessarily big data driven. But it's possible, but I haven't really seen a whole lot of people using big data tools yet.
Interesting. Well, we'll go ahead and wrap things up. So thank you to today's speaker, and thank you to everyone who attended for your time and attention. We hope that you'll join us again for our next Learning Trends webinar, which will be next week on February 14th. This will be on creating individualized learner experiences, differentiated, personalized, and adaptive strategies. Registration is available at gpstrategies.com under webinars. I wish everyone on the call a wonderful and productive rest of your week. Thank you.